You're listening to the UM3D Podcast, where we explore fresh ideas and real-world experiences that shape how we teach and learn. Recorded in the podcast studio at McWhirter Library, we bring you conversations with educators and experts to help you design, develop, and deliver high-quality instruction. In this episode, Trish Lange sits down with Dr. Will Duffy to discuss the evolving landscape of writing pedagogy in the age of generative AI and the role the humanities can play in shaping ethical, creative, and reflective approaches to this emerging technology.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Trish Lange. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Will Duffy of the Department of English at the University of Memphis. Dr. Duffy specializes in rhetoric and writing studies with particular interests in collaborative writing, artificial intelligence, and communication ethics. He's served as the founding director of the U of M Center for Writing Communications and the director of English Graduate Studies. He's also the new associate director at the Institute of Intelligent Systems here. Thanks so much for talking with me today. What sparked your interest in generative AI?
So primarily, it was the public rhetoric about it and its similarity to so many previous literacy crises, if you want to use that term since we're in the education context. By spring 2023, I felt like I was just witnessing players in a script enact roles, the camps that were developing, the kinds of concerns that were being elevated, the ones that were not. It all felt very predictable to me. And it just so happened that I was scheduled to teach a special topics graduate seminar that following fall in 2023. And I decided sort of on a whim to call the class Teaching Writing with AI and to design it functionally as sort of a sandbox space where all of us would just experiment and try to figure out what was going on. But functionally, though, before that experience of teaching that class, it was not so much generative AI itself that I was reacting to. It was all of the public reactions to it, especially the reactions coming from fellow humanities educators and scholars who, frankly, I feel like are the best positioned to not take a fearful or hyperbolic stance towards a lot of this discourse.
That's really interesting you say that, because when I talk to the humanities professors, the ones that have the most heavy writing loads in their classes, they're the ones who feel the most at risk. And they also feel that this is going to just demolish not only their students' writing ability, but their students' ability to think logically.
Yeah, well, I honestly, I struggle to, I say this as, a concerned family member for all my fellow humanists out there, right? Like, I understand the struggle, but a lot of this struggle is largely of our own creation, I feel like. And so I impart what I feel like a lot of humanists are best positioned to do is to, develop public explanations for how to understand concepts like intelligence, concepts like collaboration, concepts like learning, because these are things that we have obsessed about as humanists for hundreds and hundreds of years. We have developed theories and methods and ways of thinking, an entire branch of philosophy that's been largely rejected by other areas in the world, but American pragmatism remains one of the golden methods for figuring out tenacious problems and, in real time. And all of that is based on the idea that we are experts in the experiences that we bring to a space. And all we have to do is learn to ask questions, experiment, and test the results, and then name what we're seeing. That, I feel like, is what humanists are best positioned to help everyone else figure out in terms of how AI and how a lot of the methods and protocols that will be developed around these technologies. I think we're some of the best ones to help just explain concepts and develop metaphors and create the conceptual structures that we are going to need as a society, as a culture, in particular vocations, to make sense of these tools as they develop further.
Right. Do you find your students help you think this through?
Absolutely. And that's something I will say that teaching that particular course in the fall of 2023 was a pretty transformative experience for me, because that was the first time that I went into a course not knowing what I was doing in terms of the content of the course, but also having complete confidence in knowing what I was doing in terms of the design of the course, if that makes sense. And so there have been times when, for anyone who hasn't heard this term, a special topics course, especially in graduate education, usually refers to basically it's an opportunity to just develop a course that might be themed around a particular topic or subject area, but it's a way to sort of do a deep dive in some way. And so, there have been, I coincidentally taught a topics course called Language, Cognition, and Writing about 4 or 5 years ago when I first developed an interest in cognitive science and rhetoric. And I remember feeling very inadequate all throughout that course because I was kind of teaching myself the material as the course was going, but I was also trying to teach that course in a much more traditional format, where even though it was a graduate seminar, it was still, premised on the idea that I was the expert coming in and I was going to direct and assess these graduate students. Exactly. Even when we deliberately try not to be. But with this particular course, from the very beginning, I approached it very transparently and said, I don't know how to use these tools necessarily. I don't know how these tools work, but I am confident in what I know how to do as a literacy educator. And so let's figure out what these tools can do.
So this is an instructional design concept called collaborative learning.
Yes, it is.
Students tend to absolutely love it.
Yes.
Except for those who play the rigid rule game extremely well. And there are also students, the straight A students who do all the extra credit assignments. Those are the ones that play the game really well. It doesn't really matter. As long as you give them the structure, they're going to succeed. When you do collaborative learning, you're letting all the other folks come in as well.
Yeah, but and I think though this is the challenge with even that idea of collaborative learning in that context is how much and I'm using this term very deliberately, like how much like emotional labor is required on the part of the instructor to allow themselves to actually be a collaborator.
Right.
And that is so difficult because it means that you have to deliberately step away from some of the practices and some of the expected roles that others expect you to do.
Right. And again, also, the vast majority of folks who have gone straight through school all the way through the PhD program, you guys are the ones who do great at the structured learning. And you're the ones who always do the extra credit assignments. And you are the ones who do that structure so well, which is why it does take so much of an emotional support to get outside of that. In a previous podcast, when I talked to Professor Kim Marks, she comes from a 30-year military service background. She was in, I believe, the Navy for 30 years. And so she comes and she is really flexible at this sort of thing. And it's almost second nature to her. And it's kind of unfair, quite frankly.
Yeah, right.
It's absolutely unfair that she can just pivot and say, I see this is where his industry is going. How do I help my students get there? As opposed to we're looking at it in such a structured way, scientific way, Socratic way. Which is fascinating.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah.
We're about to start at the University of Memphis an AI for all minor It's got 2 core courses and then a bunch of electives. You're teaching one of these 2 core courses. You're teaching the second one. It's going to be called AIFA 2010, and it's called Skills and Techniques for Applied AI. Well, that's all, right? That's just a little bit. I mean, this sounds really wide-ranging. If this is open to anybody from any major, just the idea of trying to decide what skills are going to work for all these folks. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions? I'm still trying to figure that out.
Well, I find a dartboard helps.
I mean, yeah, for listeners to know, Trish is we're trying to figure this out together. Since there's going to be an online version of this course. Yeah. So, the AI for All minor is functionally the U of M's first iteration of an applied AI program, which simply means that the purpose of this program is to equip students with the knowledge and techniques needed to use AI effectively and ethically in whatever professional context matter to them. And I was thinking about this earlier because as I've been developing the course, I'm seeing it more specifically as an opportunity to blend sort of to sort of introduce students to human-centered design and user experience alongside the tested and like the various techniques associated with project management. And so functionally, like what I imagine this class as being is a place where students will help us. And when I say us, I mean other educators, the other students. It will be the businesses and organizations that they go to work with when they graduate. But the purpose of this course is to develop essentially the capacity to go into an organization and help design the cultures of use around AI. Just like how with the invention of the personal computer, this industry called IT sprung up. I think that's that's an exciting area of where I think as an instructional designer too, I think there's so much potential to think about, again, like what does it take, to go into a space that has its own processes, its own, methods, it's whatever it is, and to sort of say like, hey, let's figure out how everyone is using AI, because everyone is using it in some way, right? Probably. And I imagine a lot of our uses are still pretty personal. And I'm not saying secretive, because I don't think a lot of us think about it as secretive, but personal as in, maybe we don't want others to know that we are experimenting with it in certain ways. But I think part of what we need is to create sort of structures and processes where all of us who are figuring out what these tools actually are and can do can be transparent about this, so that sort of our collective experience with just experimenting with them, however, even the informal ways, how that can sort of contribute to, again, a culture of use that is supportive, ethical, that is responsive, and essentially sort of enacting all of these things that we hope our college graduates are going to do anyway.
Right. I think it's really interesting that you say, we're already using AI, and we're also being a little secretive about it. And I think that comes back down to the whole concept of academic integrity. But at the same time, you and I, we are experts at what we do. All of us are experts because we've spent a lot of time learning the basics. And academic integrity really happens at the basic level, right? You have to learn how to write well before you can start using AI to help you write. You have to have that basics done. When we're playing with AI, we already have the basics down for our industry.
Yeah.
Yet we still feel guilty using it.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a freedom in allowing ourselves to use it to benefit us and not feel guilty about it. So I think this speaks a lot to teaching our students and then allowing ourselves as well, when is it appropriate to use, when is it not appropriate to use, and be able to justify that.
Absolutely. You asked earlier sort of to think about, one of the questions to think about was how are students going to potentially be using AI in their future careers? And the answer that I started with was to say, well, let's think about how we're using it right now. And just today, I was using AI as functionally what I would call a versioning tool. Next week, I'm helping lead a workshop with three other English faculty, for Memphis and Shelby County high school English teachers, for about 25 teachers who are coming to the U of M next week for 2 days. And we're going to give them basically a crash course on AI literacy. And for part of the section that I am going to be leading, I have designed an activity, and I was using AI this morning to help create different versions of how this activity could be scaffolded and for how this activity could be presented and explained in different ways. Already, I want to point out a couple of things of what I just did is I specifically named how I'm using AI. I just called it a versioning tool. And then I also just used some jargon. I used the word scaffold. I'm pointing to the fact that I'm already the prompt, quote, the supposed prompt, the knowledge that I'm bringing to the prompt itself was already developed, was already there. And what I'm essentially doing is using this technology to help discover all these potential ways to be effective, just like what rhetoric is meant to do, which is to help us discover ways of being persuasive in any kind of given situation. And so in that particular case, if I use this as an example, I think, well, this is going to be how our students use AI, not necessarily in the same, take the details of my example as part, but this process of, having a kind of standardized task or something that, you're asked to do somewhat frequently. I'm frequently asked to give workshops and whatnot. And then you suddenly say, well, how are ways that I can design better, more effective workshops based on the feedback that I get from other ones using some of these tools? And so
you're teaching the same workshop, but your demographics have changed. How can I make my examples I use in my workshop work better for this demographic than the ones I just taught?
Absolutely. And I think that's what the techniques and dispositions needed to be confident in that kind of exploration are what I hope this particular AI 2010, I think is the number course, Skills and Techniques, what that course is really focused on, which is, again, is to kind of develop the headspace necessary to respond both to and listen, I understand the hype. And so I think a large part of what our responsibility is from a program development standpoint is to help students develop the language and rhetorical resources for responding to these questions, and probably in ways that are more patient than I would be in some of my weaker moments. But that's the goal, right? I mean, we have two, I think from an applied AI perspective, there's two really great opportunities for students here. One is I sometimes like to quote the Wharton professor, Ethan Malik, who has a book called Co-Intelligence that I really like. It's a nice introduction to applied AI. But he will kind of often say, nobody knows anything in reference to these kind of big, vague questions about AI that he'll get. But I read that question as more of a generative response of saying, nobody knows anything, so why don't you figure it out? Nobody knows anything. We need to invent. We need to invent these responses. And so on the one hand, I think this is a great opportunity for students who want to be positioned to be thought leaders around AI in the very kind of small and local environments where they're going to be working or further studying. We need thought leaders. We need practitioners who can help us make sense of these tools and processes. But then the other thing is we need language. We need metaphors. We need other conceptual tools that can be shared with different communities that can help dispel, or sort of not dispel the hype, but at least provide some alternative spaces to just ask questions and think and tinker outside of a lot of that noise.
Underneath the hype, there's just some really good, plain old use cases that need to be determined.
Absolutely.
And I like the idea that this course is going to let students from a variety of disciplines figure what that's going to be for their own discipline.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because the fact of the matter is that's the only way it's going to happen anyway. And that's the only way it ever happens. Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of institutions have kind of met the challenges of generative AI through pretty traditional methods of, you put together a task force and you create some guidelines and then you develop policies, and all of these things are important. But again, as someone who's anyone who kind of is, on the ground, so to speak, that's not how practice develops. That's that sort of outside in. I mean, at best, what you end up doing is teaching to a policy, or you end up teaching to a particular expectation. But in practice, like, all of this stuff is iterative and experimental. And so, the best policies are the ones that really encourage that experimentation. And then that naming, that sort of saying like, you know what, that felt a little too far. I mean, I think that's something that also I think is missing from a lot of this discourse is, the design thinker in me wants to emphasize that failure is a good thing. And so if we're afraid of how students are going to use AI, well, then let's maybe invite them to use AI in every possible creative way and really stress the creative part and like use our students to tell us like, why is this acceptable or not? Why should this be or not? Something that my primary experience teaching with AI over the last few years has told me, which is absolutely, and I believe it firmly, which is that when you take the ethical concerns that everyone has about this tool and you put them on the table in front of everyone, and you say, I like this policy that the school has, I don't know if it works or not. Like, but I want to figure out like, what are some ways that we can use AI to complete this particular kind of a task or in this particular assignment? What are some ways that we can use AI that maybe are not going to be considered cheating, that are not, like we can give our students this challenge to help us figure these things out. There are always going to be students who want to take a shortcut. And I don't care about those students. And so I don't want to design policies that prevent those students, that I guess put those students as our number one concern. And moreover, I think that when we give students the responsibility to tell us what is valuable and meaningful, that puts a lot of pressure. That puts a lot of good pressure on students. And that kind of good pressure, whatever gets produced is going to be useful because it came from this place of good pressure. It came from that place of like, oh, I got to the end of something that was uncertain and I'm not in trouble, or I learned something, or like I've helped others figure something out.
And that's all we really want for our
That's
students. What
we should be going for. And again, at the end of the day, like, that has nothing to do with AI. That's just good teaching.
That's good teaching. That's good learning.
That's good learning.
Yeah. And that's a perfect place to end our discussion, helping students figure out for themselves how to learn and how to use tools and how they're going to apply that further in life. I think that's brilliant. Well, Dr. Will Duffy, it has been a pleasure talking to you today.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
I'll make sure the resources you talked about will show up in our show notes.
Awesome.
All
Fantastic.
Right. Today, Dr. Will Duffy, Associate Director for the Institute of Intelligent Systems and faculty member in the Department of English at the University of Memphis, helped us explore how generative AI intersects with writing, ethics, and collaborative learning, and why the humanities have a vital role to play in shaping how we think about and use these tools. Dr. Duffy reminds us that good teaching isn't just about keeping up with technology. It's about fostering curiosity, creativity, and responsible experimentation. If you're interested in the AI for All minor mentioned in this episode, be sure to check out the show notes for links and resources. We'll be back soon with more conversations to help you design, develop, and deliver high-quality instruction.